Welcome to Ctrl-Alt-Defend, the podcast where we sit down with groundbreaking guests, industry leaders, innovators, and trailblazers in cybersecurity. Your hosts are two seasoned veterans, Michael Wiley and Peter Morin.
Welcome to episode 2. So Equifax suffered a data breach. It's not news. It was 2017 that affected 147 million U.S. citizens. Their names, social security numbers, date of births, addresses, driver's license, all that stuff was exposed due to a web security vulnerability in Equifax systems. The breach also exposed credit card data of a smaller group of over 200,000 people. The attackers broke into Equifax system between May and July of 2017 by taking advantage of an unpatched Apache Struts vulnerability to hack into the credit referencing agency's dispute resolution portal. The cybercriminals moved laterally through their systems, became a big disaster. We all saw it on the news. At the end of the day, Equifax faced numerous lawsuits and government investigations. The credit referencing agency was left with an estimated 1.7 billion, that's with a B, billion out-of-pocket expenses because of this breach, and their stock price took a hit. Equifax spent an estimated of $337 million improving its technology and data security, along with legal and computer forensic fees. The list goes on. So when companies fail to design privacy from the start, the fallout can cost millions or billions, and more importantly, break users' trust. Today, we're joined by someone who's building privacy into engineering, and they've done that for a long time. Our guest today knows a thing or two about privacy. Michelle has an impressive background. Hi, I'm Michael Wiley, and I'm joined by my co-host, Peter Morin. Peter, would you please introduce our very special guest today?
I'd love to. Thank you. Yeah, right off the bat, I'd like to say Michelle is a great friend and a very, very busy person. And so we're really happy to have her. Michelle Dennedy is a trailblazer in privacy engineering and data ethics, currently serving as Chief Data Strategy Officer at Abaxx Technologies, following the acquisition of Privacy Code, the company she founded and led as CEO. Prior to her work at Privacy Code and Privatus, Michelle was Vice President and Chief Privacy Officer at Cisco, where she spearheaded the development and implementation of enterprise-wide data privacy policies, collaborating across business units to embed privacy excellence throughout the security continuum. She also led privacy at other companies such as McAfee and Oracle. With a JD from Fordham University School of Law and a BS from Ohio State University, Michelle has authored the Privacy Engineer's Manifesto and Privacy Engineer's Companion, and she created the Wicked Privacy methodology to guide ethical data practices in the age of AI. Her contributions have earned her prestigious honors, including the Goodwin Procter IAPP Vanguard Award, CSO's Magazine's Women of Influence, and a Gold Stevie Award for Women of the Year in Technology. All that aside, I'd really love to find out exactly how Michelle got her start in privacy, a really, really interesting and important area that we talk about all day.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you guys so much for having me on episode 2. I feel very honored to be here amongst friends and fellow data nerds. My start in privacy was before I even knew I had a start in privacy. My father was a security engineer and mainframe guy back starting in the 50s in the US Navy, and then on places like Standard Oil, Corning Glass, Merck, United Airlines, anywhere that you see a mainframe back in the day. Dad was probably there setting it up, and then we were moving around the country doing it. In the interim, my mother was an intellectual property lawyer. So I said, going into college, I will never be a lawyer and I will never work with technology. So finally laid plans. I immediately started working on a research program there, working on robotics and really early IoT. This is like early 80s. And we were working with paraplegic and quadriplegic children, teaching them science and using a modified RICO arm. So I realized very, very early and very, very young, although I was looking at the psychology and the sociology of the interactions, that the code, when it was wrong, allowed our children to play and break things, which you don't get to do in a wheelchair very often. And the code, when it worked, really opened up a world of access. And so my mindset setting out as a very young person was that technology, first of all, it's never neutral, and it can be for tremendous good and it can be for very negative. But at the end of the day, we create it and we use it so that you can look into the eyes of a child and watch their joy and their control over their environment, or doing things faster and better than we could as unaugmented humans. So this goes way, way, way back for me when I ended up going to law school. I started out in patent law, so I can't get away from the nerds. I just love them. Everything new, non-obvious. And so it was with that, I came to Sun Microsystems at the turn of the century, right after my boss, Scott McNeely, said, "You have zero privacy. Get over it." So as you can imagine, most of the senior people were running that way. And I was going, tell me more. This is interesting. So very much a lot of my approaches are, first of all, human centricity. Secondly, just like we do with novel pieces of intellectual property, when I think about data and data flows, I think about how it serves a business need. So that, the old-fashioned Zachman framework, you start with a business need and then you protect it. So privacy for me has always been a supply chain issue. It's always been an ephemeral rights issue, and it's always been an economic driving issue. When I presented the business case to Scott McNeely, who was not an easy sell on privacy, as you can imagine, I said, listen, we've got Diffie over here. We've got containers. We've got middleware. We've got obviously servers and chips. And the only reason you would buy Sun and Solaris was to be heavily, heavily secured. So why in the world wouldn't you lead with privacy and have a person that we named amongst like 5 or 6 of us said, what should we call ourselves? And we said, let's call ourselves chiefs, because we were all very young and mostly women. And so we said, okay, we'll call ourselves chief privacy officers. And I left the legal department to set up the first operational team at Sun. So that's really when I got started. And I followed through on leading sales teams, built a whole company platform using LLMs, converting policy into Jira tickets and solvable tasks. But really for the better part of 30 years now, maybe closer to 40, it really is about technology augmenting what and who we are as human beings, and how do we make the best of that and then solve for X, which is sometimes people do horrible things. So we want to make sure that's kind of knocked down. So big, long answer to how I got into it. I got into it philosophically because there were no classes, there were no certifications, and there were no organizations. So I dove in, we grouped together. I think my first International Association of Privacy Professionals, there were 20 people and a keg of beer. So I've been at this for a minute.
Wow. Impressive background there. And you wrote a book as well.
I did along the way, actually, again, with my dad. My dad was at a company, a consultancy called Cyber, with CIBER. And he was mandatorily retired at age 70. And my mother was terribly worried at the time that he would get underfoot and be bored. So I had been calling home, from my patent days, saying, Dad, how does this work? Or are these engineers BSing me? Is this true? How does identity management work? All that stuff. And I've been doing this for decades. And so I said, hey, Dad, and I had a series of white papers about privacy engineering that I had started putting out at Sun, using the Sun Ray, using what we're now calling Kubernetes, VM kind of management. And I said, let's formalize privacy by design is really huge, but it's very philosophical, policy driven. When I talk about the 7 principles of privacy by design, and I'll go toe to toe with engineers, even if I'm lucky enough to be there in the early instantiation stages, often I'll walk away and the 2 thoughts of dev people are often, oh, it's encrypted, so it's private, or, oh, that policy chick will come back at the end and write me magic language that will disclaim away this very heavily process driven thing. And so that's where you get the things like Equifax and others. Like, yes, there's people who exploit things, but often I think some of these vulnerabilities, not specifically that one, but many are because we're trying to hold water in our hands, right? Rather than saying, what is this thing we're trying to protect of data? How am I building specifically for this very unique material and timing, and where does it sit in context? So that's really where the origins of what we were going to call a privacy engineering primer. And we soon realized it really was a manifesto. It's like, here's our belief about how law and culture, laws around the world, philosophies around the world, technology as we know it, and what are the truths about technological ethics and building and planning. And then finally, the third part of the book is, how do you organize around this so that it's sustainable? How do you value this so that, like patents or trademarks or other forms of IP, we start to look at an ROI of data and stop thinking about it as some sort of exhaust fume. And so that's really where it became the manifesto.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, so that answered my first two questions, actually. I was going to say that I think you really shaped what we now call privacy engineering, and I was going to ask what inspired you to write the Privacy Engineers Manifesto. And then my second question was going to be around, for those who haven't read it, could you kind of give a summary? So I think we
What's the
got both of
summary?
those.
And it's quite
Right.
old. I mean, we published it in 2014. And it's very funny because many people have said over the years, oh, it's not technical enough. And then I say, have you read it? And of course they haven't. And so when you go into it, we do talk about data diagramming, sequencing, planning, architecture, like real concepts that have withstood the test of time. I am working on an update because we don't develop in tiger teams or even agile teams anymore, the way that we're doing it, particularly with AI assist. So there's a new book on the horizon. It's a little bit dot on the horizon, but the publisher's already said, yes, we want this second edition. But one more point about privacy engineering, which I think is really relevant to today, having a conversation with my dad about his earliest days, before there was an electrical engineering major, most of these people were coming through mathematics or other disciplines. And the true engineers were things like civil, mechanical, ceramics, that sort of engineering. And when you look at the basic definition of what is engineering, what is it, the tool, it really isn't somebody who codes to make apps for the Google Play Store. It is someone who takes the materials and the technologies available and solves a problem. And so he looked at it through that light and lens, although he really was an engineer. I was not. I was a psych major with a law degree. But also looking at, and I think they still do this in Canada and they still do this for civil engineering, but it used to be that if you were going to call yourself a professional engineer or a PE, you had to pass some tests and you had to have ethical credentials too. And there really was a manifesto of a credo of ethics of do no harm. If you're building a bridge, you can't be crushing the wildlife below or having materials that'll dissolve in a rainstorm. And so when we thought about privacy by design, what would it be to be a privacy engineer? Also introducing the concept that you really are doing ethical engineering while you're doing it. So that's why we called it privacy engineering, to have that PE kind of acronym.
Yeah, obviously the book was well before its time, especially with what you said, coming into having written the book and then working at Sun in the early days of kind of a lack of privacy, I guess you could say.
More than you think.
I mean, I'm not a privacy expert, but in a lot of what I see today, privacy is still tied to compliance. It's still, we have to do it. We don't have a choice, whether it's compliance in Europe or in the US or Canada or what have you. Are you seeing more of a shift where people are saying this is just the right way of doing things from a cybersecurity perspective, as opposed to just tying it to compliance?
It's a real mix. And it's like, there's not like the median sounds good, but it still is very sigma'd. So there are people who just want to do SurveyMonkey compliance. Check, 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 check. Most of it's lies or willful ignorance, where they're like, well, this is what the policy said. I handed it to my engineers. It's up to them to do their jobs in a quite haughty fashion. It's impossible to make that translation, but it's easier. And the compliance needs are incredibly complex now, with so many kind of laws that are concertinaing on each other between cybersecurity, IoT, ethics, pure privacy. So there are people who are desperately trying to play whack-a-mole compliance. There are people hanging on by fingernails, doing the best they can privacy. And in that same world, I think it's unfortunate because they don't see the innate value to businesses and NGOs and governments. And so you're seeing privacy professionals looked at extra or nice to have. So there's a whole class of chief information security officers that have been shoved into a corner having to do ampersand privacy, ampersand ethics, ampersand AI, while they're chasing madly complex, vulnerable state attacks. So they're being asked to really have 3 or 4 very specific and detailed disciplines all together with very different mindsets of how the stuff works. So that's one side. And then there's the other side that obviously, these are my favorite clients. I do a lot of consulting work in addition to my duties at Abaxx. There's another group that sees this as an international data supply chain. And just like you wouldn't put hydrochloric acid into a rubber pipe, you would not put your most integral customer data into a public forum and then not protect it and just tell everyone, hey, Mike's going to go call on this customer today, and here's the price he's going to state to them, that instantly we get how that transaction should remain contextually secret between those parties only for at least a period of time. It may be after the deal is done, particularly if it's in a governmental setting. It might even be publicized and the pricing, whatever. But you can see the contextual and the over time. When you look at this as a data supply chain, you can see how privacy and data alacrity and integrity are huge business drivers, particularly in such an information-centric environment, and getting more so with machine learning.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I'm, as a consultant, whether we're doing maturity assessments or non-compliance type assessments, self-assessments, those kind of things. It's unfortunate because we're still not seeing privacy as like a component that we should be addressing as a maturity factor.
Yeah.
Unless you're specifically going to just address maturity or maturity of privacy. Same thing where I could tell you right now that the majority of the clients I talk to, a big gap they still have is they still don't have a data classification policy or
Yes.
have any kind of technology to manage where their data is going and it's always, oh, that's really complicated and it's at the bottom of our list and until something major happens.
It's such an important, and so I think it's interesting because security is the same way. If there's a security loss, it's your fault. But if a deal goes through well and the pricing wasn't known by your competitor, if an HR person has hired that great candidate and landed them or poached them even from a competitor, if the marketing person has found the right marketplace or buyer or price or message to hit and grow the business, none of that is called privacy. All of it is using personally identifiable information to connect 1+1 and make something new happen. That's privacy, the authorized processing and sharing of data according to ethical, legal, and sustainable principles. That's just how I literally define it functionally in the manifesto. So each part of that transaction has a contextual and often technical component. And that's where I think the real maturity isn't. I love the SCF, the secure control framework, because it does cross map to a lot of other standards on the compliance side. But I always start with every client. What is it that you want to do? Do you want to go to Europe and sell more things? Are you a mobile provider? Do you deal with children? Do you want to hire more people? Are you laying people off? All of those things that have nothing to do with reading any statute yet absolutely start to get you to 80 to 90% to compliance when you do them well. And then you look at the nuances and go, that's weird. Why do we get to put a notice there? Okay, whatever, cookies.
And so touching back on the book, I know you said that there may be a second edition on the horizon. So a lot's changed in the 11 years since it's been published. What can you give us a little sneak peek? Like what would you put, or what are some of the top things that you want to put in if you do a second edition?
I think so. Even things like, so privacy code really connected a lot through Jira. So communicating through breaking things down into micro tasking rather than having the full sequence diagram in front of you. I think that's a big sea change. A lot of people are, when we're asking them to do privacy and security and be aware, they may be doing really just a feature or a component or even just a 2-week sprint to move things along. I think focusing more on how development workers work is a big part of the new component. And then I think we didn't emphasize supply chain enough. We talked about vendors and vendor management, which is very compliance focused and legal focused. But I think as far as the technology of, yes, now you've built this thing, how does it live? How do you deal with classification? How do you deal with end of life? How do you deal, like the GDPR doesn't deal with mergers and acquisitions. Now what? Now what are we going to do? Everything is collapsing into different industries. And what does it mean if you can't buy a training set now? That's a problem for your valuation. So that's more of that stuff, I think. And I will double down still. If you think through what your roles are, what data do they need to function? A lot of that old fashioned stuff, it works in privacy, it works in functionality, it works in efficiency. just good building.
Great. I look forward to it. Your first book has a lot of great reviews on Amazon. So I'm sure the second will as well, if you choose to publish that. You keep going, answer my questions before I have them. So I'm going to go get a tinfoil hat and I'm going to pass it to Peter and see if he can maybe ask you a question.
Poor Mike. I told we were going through the outline. I was like, if we stick to this outline, I'll be shocked. So I apologize.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to
Okay.
ask one. I'm going to ask a question. As we mentioned in the first episode, Mike's got a background in on the threat hunting side and in running businesses and the like. And my question, I guess, I'm always curious because we see this in whether it's threat hunting or pen testing or incident response, or any of those areas where we're collecting all kinds of really critical data that we need to do our jobs, whether it's logs or artifacts or metadata or what have you. Is there a way we have to think about those things from a privacy perspective?
Yeah, and it's a very good question. And so Mike's world and my world collide a lot. When you don't have a great working relationship with your cybersecurity team, it's easy to say, oh, you can't have that information as a privacy person reading a law. And they're saying, well, I can't do my job unless I have all of the information about the environment. So how am I going to know? Or how am I going to know which hacker is a white hat versus which is a malicious actor or an insider threat, or et cetera? So I think when privacy and security work beautifully together, we look at what the outcomes should be in the best case world. And then, of course, being the diabolical thinkers that we are in privacy and security, we think of all the things that will go wrong, stuff that we know about, known vulnerabilities. I even actually pitch clients this way because if I'm doing business, if I want to catch a customer that's a bank, see, I'm looking at Peter, so it's a Canadian bank, and I want to win Scotiabank's business, I'm going to look through the vulnerabilities that are happening at RBC and TD and all these other banks. Why? Because I know how you buy. Because you all go to each other and go, hey, what's great in identity? Hey, what are you using for this? Hey, not in a malicious way at all, but because it's hard to keep on top of things. So if I know what their vulns is, there's a really good chance I'm going to walk into your office swagging it out saying, hey, I know you've got this thing. And I see the blank face and I'm like, haha, haha. So here's me without knowing anything about insider, but I know the behavior. So it's a lot like being an information hacker in that way. And I think also you do have to respect that these bad guys are willing to do terrible things and they do it fast and they're not bound by any compliance need. So when you do have someone coming in and doing red teaming or blue teaming or purple teaming, you have to have a space for that. You have to be able to really think through the personalities of those folks too. Like Mike's going to come in, he's going to find all these bad things. Is he going to be thinking a lot about how does that exit path look? Have we shut down all the things? You know, a lot of times we'll break things and we'll be like, oh my God, it's a breach. And everyone goes running around. And then we leave everything open. So we're ready for repeat players to come on. I think if I was a much more nefarious person, that's all I would do. I'd wait for a breach. I'd know that the fuss is going to die down in 6 months. And then I'm just going to go and have a field day with your data. So it really is balancing. Instead of being like us versus them, I need all the data. You can't have the data. It's really, what is our common objective? I'm doing a mini privacy engineering on top of that. Like, how do I allow my pen testers access? How do I make sure that people's, respect, and it changes in various places. How you're going to explore your employee data in Germany is going to be different than how you're going to do it in Canada. It's going to be different how you're going to do it in the US. So how are we going to make sure that we have those sort of set parameters, hopefully ahead of time and hopefully transparently enough so that we're setting the right expectations and we're creating enough security around the security so that you can really get the best of those programs together? Or you just get in a fight and it's annoying.
That was going to be my follow-up question is, as Peter said, the last two roles I've had, I was at CrowdStrike's the director of Falcon Overwatch, and then currently the director of threat hunting at Zscaler. And across my experience in both orgs, and we're dealing with customer data, right? So rightfully so that the lawyers and the privacy experts are ensuring that we're taking those things seriously. But that being said, I see every day the frustration of the threat hunters, right? Where they say, I need to go see the logs in this server in Europe, or I need to, there's possibly a connection between this incident in Europe and this one in Canada and this one in the US and this one in Japan. And I need to connect the dots on a single system and kind of correlate all the logs together. But you're telling me I can't, and I have to just read only through a screen because the data has to stay there. So they have a hard time doing their job, and there's no tools that they have to correlate that all without bringing the data onto their laptop, let's say. So they find a lot of frustration in being able to do their jobs, protect customers, while then also adhering to some of those privacy laws or just standard operating procedures within a company. So what advice do you have, I guess, to both sides, right? The defenders who are frustrated that they can't do their job because they can't bring the data together or move it around. And then also on the people that are making some of these policies or standard operating procedures saying, keep the data where it is. How do we bridge that gap?
Well, I'll say in my dream scenario, the best scenario, and this actually goes into the rewrite of the manifesto's methodology, is we did allow for a persona that was auditor in the first book. So I'm expecting a regulator needs to know some stuff. So how do you, in whatever systems, how are you planning the logs accordingly? How are you planning to have documentation? How are you doing reporting? I don't think enough times are we planning for that persona of my blue hat hackers who need to be inside the system, or the red hats that come in from the outside to try to pen test us. I think that is a persona that you have to pre-plan into your systems because we need that work. You can't anticipate all unknown unknowns. You need people that are going to try to come in from the outside. So best case scenario, you've already planned that as a persona, and you're thinking about if it has to travel interstate, if it has to travel to a secure enclave, if you have to have, just like we do with giant M&As, we have secure places that people can go into a workroom, and having that ahead of time so that it is fast, so that you're not saying, well, we're under attack right now, and Mike's the only guy in town that knows how to do this, and he has his own kludged together super Mac with the latest NVIDIA chip soldered on the back end, and this is the guy. And so suddenly your stuff is there, and you can sort of plan for that. And I think you can sort of mea culpa after that if you have to a regulator, you're still going to get nailed. So I think planning how you're going to do that, how are you going to build in for speed? And then how are you going to literally figure out what is existential and how do we get the information so that you can, if you're looking for anomalies, how do we show that there is anomalous activity? If I'm setting up a distributed ledger, how do I make it dumb enough that I'm not exposing everything in the ledger, but smart enough that Mike and Peter can go in and audit that A, there's been a transaction, B, it is validated, C, it had the right auth posture. So I think we need to rethink a lot of how we've been playing this cat and mouse game, even with the bad guys, to start engineering in this absolute routine. Like we need a cyber cop on the beat.
Makes me think actually relevant here that for the longest time, as you mentioned, I'm in Canada right now. And, as cloud environments kept coming and coming and coming, there's, we're starting to distribute outside of like physical data centers, right? And for years, it was always, you would go talk to a client and the client would say, we're going to do these great backups and we're going to send our backups to the cloud. And then the first thing they would say, and we're not talking about government entities, we're just talking about corporations.
Yeah.
And they would say, oh yeah, you know what? We're going to put a backup in Seattle and one in Germany, and we're going to put one in Japan for distribution. And then the first thing Canadians would say was, oh, no, our data can't leave Canada. And for the most part, a lot of people would, you'd say, well, why not? They wouldn't even know why. They would just, that's what they've been told. And I'm just curious, kind of we're in that same vein, is that still something that's relevant today?
It happens all the time. And I think particularly with increasing nationalism and balkanization and crazy trade slinkies going downstairs these days, I do get a lot of people saying it has to be either on-prem, and I look at them and go, explain to me where your prem is, because I know that you're using a lot of cloud services on the back end. And the other one is a technological somehow sovereignty when the data, particularly if you want it to be up 24/7, it's traveling globally. And so it's not as easy as just to say it has to go. You have to find a way to go. And I remember that some of the earlier kind of things that I had to encounter was, right after 9/11, we passed the Patriot Act in the US. 2 Congress people said no. 2. So you've seen what's going down here in the US these days. Do you think in 2001, everyone was like holding hands and singing Kumbaya? Hell no. If you get a piece of legislation that game changing, it's because huge amounts of fear and pressure were being brought to bear. It was an absolute moment in history that we passed this thing. And guess what? It wasn't well debated. It wasn't well thought out. And there were a lot of dumb things in there. Had to get worked out. One of them was like, here in California, and we did a ton of servicing for Canadian healthcare, for example. And the minute the Patriot Act came down, I suddenly got a flood of things from my Canadian customers saying, you have to sign this thing that if you get a request from a FISA court, you have to notify us. And I was like, if I sign this today with none of that happening, there's nothing, I have no requests right now. We haven't started our engagement. I'm already committing treason. Like it was that bad in the original Patriot Act. I was like, I think this is a treasonous act for me to say proactively, I will defy any sort of anti-terrorism activity by the US government. So we had to come to a way. And the funniest thing is they all came down and sat in my executive briefing center with their BlackBerries. Remember BlackBerries? They were very good and they were very secure. But they're all down there in their BlackBerries, like sending notes home and talking to mom and doing work. And I was like, we have fought for 2 days over this Patriot Act issue. And here you sit dragging sensitive information into my conference room via your BlackBerries. You guys are the IoT. So there was a lot of sort of that figuring out what is a pragmatic way of either having a faithful copy, which is how we dealt with a lot of the Russian sovereignty issues, and doing some tokenization, some pseudonymous processing and others, and some is just no one knows how to do it. Everyone's doing it wrong if we lined up all the laws and we're very religious about the whole thing. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And it's going to be harder and harder. And a lot of people too will say this is just an algorithm and the training sets are X-plays. And right. All of us on this call and anyone who's listened 30 minutes into this, anonymous data is probably a bigger myth than perfect privacy.
That's great. I know we had some questions around boardrooms and whatnot, but I think the topic that's going to be the most interesting and people have questions on is the segment on AI and privacy. So Peter, if you're all for that, how we jump into some questions on that?
I'll do a quick boardroom story though, before we go.
I'm scared already.
We need the buzzwords for the drinking games.
We'll definitely do that. Let me do a quick, one of my favorite
yes.
boardroom stories. Well, I've got two fast and furious ones. So when I landed I usually was first in seat for most of my privacy jobs. Now, usually something's there and you get to refine it. But usually I was brought in as a pirate, like hacked down with machetes. So in some places, like you go in and you like get down with the engineers and you wear your Birkenstocks and that's how you get in. Other places, it's very sales forward. And one of those places, I really literally just hired a quant and we dug through our CRM to say what deals are not closing because of privacy. And I knew compliance and security often what they really meant was privacy, but I just was very conservative and said just privacy. And then we took 2 test jurisdictions with similar types of industries. And we said, what is the difference and what is the outcomes when we do things like have greater transparency, when we proactively provide a data map to show where the stuff was going, where it was processed and what the controls were. And what we found was by simply changing terms, even before we got to full transparency, we were increasing the sales in these, and we picked Germany and Holland just because they were sensitive areas. We found that we were able to increase revenue by over $1 million per quarter. And then we looked across the European theater and we found every jurisdiction was getting something on that. And so I went into the head of sales all excited as a bunny. And I was like, look, $28 million every quarter is not great. And he was like, no, we are a multi-billion, billion. And I said, oh, so I went back to the data and I said, in those deals where we closed the deals and didn't lose the deals on the basis of privacy, what else did we sell in that package that the sales guy got to get spiffed on that quarter? Turns out it was a 10-to-1. So where you're selling something clean and good on the data sensitive side, I'm also selling hardware, gear, dumb pipes, 10xy. So now I'm making $10 million more per quarter. Now I'm getting invited to sales kickoff. So that's how you like get in there, like to get people really excited is you got to show that correlation that your customers care. You're going to close deals faster. You're going to get better legal attention and better quality and consistency on that service end. And then my second favorite story, maybe it's my first, I don't know. We got called in by a CMO and I was shocked when she said, I have too much data. And I was like, tell me more. I've never talked to a CMO who says this. And she said, I've got all these people that have access to, and they just can run their willy-nilly campaigns. And they were a stuff shop. They sell software and stuff. And so we started interviewing around. They had no data map. They weren't really sure. And they wanted to do the all one database for every customer. Every single company goes through this phase. It's like, we have to have only one database and we have our golden record. And it's really adorable. And you do it for a couple of years and you realize, okay. So they were going through this effort. And so we went around and we asked people, what is the impact of you? Why are you pulling from this database? What are you getting out of this data set? Where are you going with this? Who's allowed to read, write? And on we went until we found the guy who runs ops. And he said, every time I send a union guy out, I pay him $200 per trip. So if I send a guy out to a PO box with a part on his truck, I got to pay him that day. And he's not going to go to the place where he's supposed to go to fix stuff. So I now have an SLA problem in my contract. So the next day I'm going to send him out. I'm going to spend another $200 and I've got a fine for late service. And sometimes the part gets left behind or is not in the truck where they order a new one just because they now can't find it because weeks have gone by, not days. That turned out to be an over $8 billion problem. Yeah. So we went from people aren't opening my emails on time because my marketing database felt dirty to this dirty data went all the way through and caused trouble throughout the supply chain, throughout the franchisees. And just by cleaning up the data and understanding what the access was and having some classified, this is billing data versus locality data versus services contact data. The services guy is not going to buy your new stuff. They're just not. So don't send them emails anymore. Now we got higher percentages of click-through rates. So our marketing people are feeling sunny again. So that was one of my favorite board things of sometimes when you really look back and you look at data as a strategic asset, not only are you saving yourself, but you're making this whole thing so much more efficient. And every worker in that chain was less frustrated and happier just to be there. And that's a productivity thing that's hard to measure.
That's amazing.
That's an awesome story.
And I'm sure there's one in every business where your data could be better.
We've all been there and resonated well, that adorable story of let's get one data set and try and have a clean CRM. We've been there.
It's true.
Yeah. Okay. So for AI here, the next question, I'll pass it over to Peter. I'm sure that you just started going crazy when all these AI tools and features started coming around. It's probably your worst nightmare. So we're living in an AI-driven world. What does privacy engineering look like now that when I say everything has AI in it, everything, I think even my bank is telling me they do AI and I'm laughing at it. Like, what, how can you help me? Right. You go through a Wendy's driving or a drive-through now and it says it's AI. They're going to assume what drink I want with this. How is AI incorporated into my fast food order? So everything has AI now. What does that mean for privacy engineering?
So I actually love it. And part of this is because of my deep, dark past in patents and claims division. So dividing things out in that way and my work at Sun Microsystems. So what our cloud was, I can say it out loud now, Sun's been gone for a while. Our cloud was so much better than AWS. It was not running on the same cycles as billing, credit card databases as the old days it was. They undercharged us. But the way that we became as good as we were in distributed compute was having this philosophy of the network is the computer. So the philosophy of my very first big tech company was machine learning, distributed, and analytics. And I think a lot of the people, I think thing number one in boardrooms now, everybody, like every CEO wants it. What it is. And I say, and I think I can say this on a podcast. I used to say this. So one of my roles was chief governance officer for cloud at Sun. And my role was going around the world and saying, your data is probably more secure in my cloud than in your data center. And so a lot of people were like, I'll never, ever do, cloud. now I'm saying to AI people, like AI is a lot like teenage sex. A lot of people talk about it. A couple people are doing it. Most of the people doing it right now are doing it badly. So what do we do about AI? We're all talking about it, and everyone's saying AI is the next thing. You can fire all your staff and make everything like the Jetsons. Thing number one, a bad process automated is just a faster bad process. And so the people that are doing AI to automate things where they haven't thought through their data supply chain, they haven't thought through costs of acquisition of data, they haven't secured their environment or have any way to have someone like Mike come in and pen test it and really explore the real vulnerabilities, not just the black swans of, the Black Mirror guy comes in on his little dangling thread out of the helicopter, like the day-to-day negligent crap bulbs that really cause the biggest damages. Updating your software and having it go off to every Microsoft product. That might happen sometimes. It can be a bad day. So I think thinking through things as, are you really doing AI? Do you need to fool someone? Does a Turing test matter if we're getting really sweet about it? I know that you can fool me. Humans can lie to me. I'm certain that a well-groomed customer service AI agent can fool me. Is that the objective? Are you doing things like an airline that gave out bereavement fares online that were ridiculously small, and they had to honor that because they actually did make that offer for sale, which is an old-fashioned concept of contract and acceptance, and they had to honor that contract. So what are you doing with AI? What do you want the outcome to be? There's a lot of great, like, enhanced fun search. That's what most people are doing right now, is really fancy search. I want to know the latest laws that have been propounded about privacy in the US, and I can put that into Claude, and it's pretty good. If I then try to write a brief and use that in a court of law, you're seeing all of these lawyers and judges getting sanctioned because it's making stuff up. So first thing I do with first principles is, if you need high levels of fidelity and accuracy, where are you getting this data? Are you training off of Grok? Are you kidding me right now? It's like trying to find clean socks in a 14-year-old boy's drawer. Not going to happen. That's the training set. If I have an internal training set on, say, McKinsey did something like this, where they took all of their economic analysis of one particular vertical and put it in a pile, it's going to sound like well-reasoned, smart McKinseyans. And I'm using the wrong firm.
Quite all right. Quite all right.
If you had all of
who's
Peter's,
sponsoring this podcast?
I am watching this thing. So if I had all of Peter's work, I would probably get something that sounds a lot like Peter's advice. I still would want a Peter creature to review it, whether it's Peter himself or whatever his underlings, knowing that nuance. So I think the small LMs are great. I think the larger LMs are great for things like weather, like things you can get a little bit wrong. And so thinking through where AI has taken us, I always go back to, you can have a pile of pony poo, but piling it higher and higher doesn't make ponies, it makes cholera. So we have to really think about, what are we using these great tools for? They are pretty cool. I don't want anyone to write a cover letter ever again. What's your boredom level with this stuff? Do you need uniqueness? Are you a creative? What kind of regulatory pressures are you under for that human in the loop? So the more dire the information is that requires creativity or human judgment, I want to see more of that in my sequencing diagram, where that automated learning or algorithm or true LLMs, I want to see that further back in the process, because you're now preparing ingredients and then the chefs are here. If it's something like, I have a very known price list and everyone asks me the same questions every single day, that's a wonderful application for this stuff. So I always make my clients a little bit crazy, because they want to get down to what's the law and what do I have to do. And I always start with, what do you want to do? And what's your culture today? What kind of access do you have? And some of these firms are legacy firms, and they have the absolute right and trust to have information. I don't know why you would sell that to someone else. In fact, I would prepare it and I would think about, what is the data product that I would sell if I had the right to have this data, or if I had the years and years of wisdom that Peter's provided to his clients, and I could search that or create products out of that. in an efficient way. So that's a bit of a ramble on, but I'm very excited about what's going on in AI. I'm glad that people outside of our world are finally talking about it. It wasn't new to any of us in 2022, but it's exciting to hear from people now. And I'm excited also that things like Black Mirror exist. I want people to look at fiction. I think fiction and science fiction helps us to have hard conversations about what should happen as well as what is happening.
Yeah, I find it interesting because machine learning and AI have been around for a while, but when they started to really commercialize, when the start of ChatGPT and people started to get a little bit of a taste of it. And at the time, then it was like, well, the LLMs are all private. And even you remember at the early stages when they would talk to OpenAI and they'd say, where are you getting your data? Are you getting it from YouTube and all these other social media sites? And like, no, we've got our own stuff. Or they wouldn't answer the question. And I find as we progress, it's almost like our greediness for technology. We're like, oh, it's okay. We'll just do a little bit, it's a little bit more. So then it's like, okay, well, now I don't only want to search my private LLMs. I want it to go out to public sites and I want to enrich that data. And then, what's next? I want to have a connection with a third party and get their data and so on and so forth. So I guess my question to you would be, if I could say, what are the 3 things that you would talk to an organization about these are the top 3 things you got to think about before you start to really think about innovation? What would those be?
I think one would be to really think about the data inputs and outputs as currency. So just like you said, then this happens all the time, is like we start with a stack. I mean, a lot of times we'll start with the whole internet, let's be honest, but sometimes we'll think about, we'll just have our set of internal, like CRM, for example, and then we'll get a new set and we'll integrate that or augment that. Starting to think about that like banks do with various accounts, so that if this one piece of data turns out to be either causing us to have bias or bad information, or we obtained it illegally, like the Getty suit is showing, OpenAI and versus Getty, I can actually lift it without destroying my entire system. So think about it as currency. Think about your vendors and data as you would any sort of supplier. If you're looking to just one source, you're creating risk in your supply chain. If you're thinking about understanding provenance, to understand how close to signal is this really information? Does it include all of the people? If you use AI, and I've said this for like 10 years, if you use AI on myself and you say, what's my number one health risk? The computer would come back and say, you should go get your prostate checked. I don't have a prostate. But that's where all of the research for people my age has struck, is like they didn't include women in research studies. They were actually prohibited until the 70s. They couldn't have women in clinical studies for the FDA because they wanted everything to be same. So there's a lot of machine data, and a lot of the predictive models for the GAI models are predictive on past. So if you want to know what the bias is on how much a woman should be paid, it's a white woman 20% on the dollar and a Black woman 65% or less on the dollar. And that's the right answer to a math machine. We all know it's based on training on data that's not improved over time. So understanding provenance, understanding closeness to signal of the data sets, understanding that if any vendor tells you they're selling you great training set data that's all been consented to, they are lying. It's impossible. They are lying.
All right. Well, I think we are getting at time. I probably could talk another hour about AI and ask your opinion on the privacy there. So we may have to have you back at another point in time. The main takeaway that I got here, though, was that privacy is a design engineering discipline. It's not just a policy or a checkbox. What was one of your key takeaways, Peter?
Yeah, I just honestly loved hearing about where it's come from and how very similar to what you're saying, even though Michelle goes back to talking about sun and so on and so forth. By the way, I was a big Solaris fan, loved it. Solaris, I went all the way up to Solaris 8, 9, I was a big fan. But seeing as like, even though back then what we talked about from a privacy perspective, from a technology today, and for what we're doing with data is different today, that the basics of privacy really haven't changed. And I think that we still lack, in a lot of cases, what I'm seeing, the really basic application of privacy in a lot of things we do. And it's interesting to see that, like I said, even as technology has transitioned, privacy really hasn't. We just have to apply to the new technology we're using. So I found that really interesting, as well as, like I said, some of the biases about where our data sits and whether or not that's allowed. And I hear from both sides. I was with a client not too long ago and was saying, this was a client in Canada. And I said, they were like, well, we're going to have data that's going to be at other AWS or Azure tenants in around the world. And like, I said, we still have to think about the data leaving Canada and so on and so forth. And they're like, oh, no, we don't worry about that anymore. I'm like, since when? Like, when did that change? Right. So it's interesting. I think there's still a lot of education that has to happen. And that's why I'm happy that we were able to bring you onto this podcast, even for an hour, to talk about these things and open people's eyes up that are, think that privacy is just about the fact that you have to check the box on the website that says you can unsubscribe if you want to, right?
There's a lot more to talk about. I'm excited. We just scratched the surface of AI too. There's so much to do.
Well, Michelle, before we drop off, anything else you want to tell us about what you're up to these days, or anything you want the audience to know? I mean, we also, where do they buy your book? How do they get a hold of you? Tell us all that.
Oh yeah. So I'm no longer on Twitter. Twitter became scary. I started getting DMs from people who knew where my house was and were making physical threats. So I got off Twitter, which is very sad. So you can get, I know it's stunk because I loved, like, security Twitter was fire. I loved it. You could get any provision on any nation, and like the person that wrote the statute back in the day. Those days are over. Hopefully there'll be a new one that fills in the gap. But you can get me on LinkedIn. You can buy the Privacy Engineers Manifesto. If you want a paper copy, you can get it from any bookseller. If you want it a digital copy, you can get it for free. So you can get it on your Kindle, on your Nook. You can go to apress.com and download a PDF. I purposefully did it because you should never bribe your government. And I wanted to give the methodology to government people worldwide when I wrote the book. And so it was very easy for us to give a free copy to them and have a really robust discussion. I'm very pleased to see how many standards and governments actually refer to the methodology. So that's cool. The other two things I'm working on right now, Abaxx is working on a digital title. We do commodities clearing and exchange for physically settled goods. I don't think I could have said that before the Privacy Code acquisition, but it turns out the commodity world, everything you see and touch in our world today depends on actual stuff, like not just bits, but atoms. And so they're making it easier to modernize a really old-fashioned market that still was dependent on faxes and phone calls and wet signatures. So that's exciting. And another piece of that is a whole identity stack with verification, so that you can actually use your credentials and your ownership of commodities and other things to create a digital title that's functional and allows more people to actually trade on real stuff. So that's my Abaxx life. And then I just started advising a really exciting company called Locker, L-O-K-K-E-R. I love these guys because so many privacy companies tell you they're going to magically compliance you. And then it's, no, we're just basically going to hire Peter and have him work on our virtual spreadsheet or Survey Monkey. This thing actually, what it does is it gets rid of unwanted trackers. It'll find your web property trackers. A lot of liabilities happening through wiretapping statutes, old-fashioned statutes that come with statutory damages. That's the number one thing your litigators are doing. And the class action bar in the US is just full on fire right now, and they're raking in millions and millions on this stuff. So go to Locker, check out and see what is tracking on your site. The next time we get together, talk about AI, we'll talk about how all of that remote data, that cloud of data that's not being governed by anybody, is not making money for you. So get your web nice and tight, get your permissions to do what they say. And not only are you going to lower your risk, but you're increase your data quality, and you're just going to make yourself sleep better at night.
I could say I'm a proud owner of your book that's signed. So I've got the special copy.
Mine's not signed. Where have I been?
I don't know. Next time I see you, I'll have to sign your copy.
That would be great. That'd be great. Peter, anything you want to add before I give a quick tease for the next episode?
No, I just want to thank Michelle. I know that she's got lots going on, a fabulous, fabulous family that she's trying to keep in close before they get too old. And so we're super thrilled to have had you as our real first episode. I couldn't think of anybody else I would want to share the time with.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. So for episode 3, we are still toying with which ones to release in what order. However, I think what we're going to do is have a guest that has built some real cool AI systems for practical soft use cases. So they actually have a background in cybersecurity and then went back and learned about machine learning before the big AI boom. So there's a really cool mix of both strong security background and then also machine learning. It's going to sound weird, but I met this character while we were getting our makeup done together. We were at the LinkedIn Learning Studio in Carpinteria, and before you go on the big screen and record your course, he was doing one on retrieval augmentation generation and cybersecurity, and I was doing an AI-driven cybersecurity analyst course. There's 2 chairs. They do your hair and makeup before you get on the big screen. And we just got said, hey, what are you doing for your course? And connected on LinkedIn and seen some of his GitHub projects, super cool use cases. It's not just a lot of talk about AI, RAG, MCP, and buzzwords that you go try and it doesn't work. His stuff actually works, and he does all kinds of threat intel enrichment. And I believe they're open source and free as well. So we're going to probably see a demo and get a chance to ask him some questions. So until that next episode, we're signing off. Thanks for watching.